micro, small and medium-sized employers in the social sector, i.e. those organisations working not for profit or not for personal profit. I'm Jan Golding. I'm an associate consultant at Roots Human Resources Community Interest Company, and some of you may know me as its founder and the former chief exec. Welcome everybody and thank you for joining us today. I'm also very fortunate to be supported by Charlotte Badger, who's our consultancy services manager, and she's here to help me with the technical side of all of this. So this webinar is free for social sector organisations and it's funded from profits generated from our fee-earning consultancy work. The webinar is being recorded so that it can be accessed from our website in the future by people who can't attend today. By attending this webinar, you consent to the content being recorded. Your video and audio functionality is automatically turned off by the webinar technology. I'm going to talk for about 40 to 45 minutes. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat function as we go through. And Charlotte will help me to get the questions curated and answered at the end of the webinar. Please be aware that when you enter something into the chat function, it can be seen by everybody on the webinar. If you want to ask a question, but you're concerned about confidentiality, please contact us for a free 1-hour consultancy piece of advice. And if this webinar generally gives rise to questions that are not answered for you today, I'll explain at the end how to access further free or paid for advice and support from us. So what we're going to be covering today is the legal requirements for employers around workplace mental health. And then we'll be learning about the core standards for those people who are minded to join the Mental Health at Work commitment. And we'll be talking about that and what it is, how it can benefit your organisation. We'll be looking at the free tools that can help you to manage mental health in the workplace and some simple ways to measure the effectiveness of any actions that you might decide to take in respect to mental health, and also how to access further support from Roots HR. In particular, I've included a slide towards the end of this slide pack with some key links to specific websites and organisations and resources that I'm going to refer to as we go through. So after this, we'll send out the PowerPoint to everybody that's attended today. And it's slide number 13 that has got all the links on it that you'll want to have a look at. So background to this. On behalf of Roots HR, I've been a member of the Mental Health at Work Leadership Council from the outset when it was originally conceived. It was set up as the Thriving at Work Leadership Council. So it's a business-led council made of business representatives from across the private, public and voluntary sectors. And in addition, there's representatives from a range of businesses and organisations and membership bodies. So the council was set up as one of the recommendations from a 2017 Stevenson Farmer Thriving at Work review of mental health and employers. And this report set out a series of recommendations to achieve a 10-year vision for the UK in response to the findings of the report. There are about 24 members of the council, so there's lots of different large organisations you'll have heard of, like Deloitte, the Department for Work and Pensions, the Confederation of British Industry, E.ON, the CIPD, the Federation of Small Businesses, MACE, Eversheds, Lloyds, the IOD, Historic England and little old Roots HR. We're by far the smallest organisation involved, and I was specifically invited to the group in order to ensure that there was representation for SMEs in the not-for-profit sector. Now, I'm sure I don't need to tell you the impacts of mental health at work because you will all be aware of the challenges of supporting people at work with mental health conditions and the associated costs of absence, but also the responsibility and the worry of ensuring your staff are just okay. The human cost of mental health, poor mental health is huge, with it having an impact on the lives of many individuals and those around them. This manifests itself in a variety of ways, both at work and home, and impacts a person's ability to manage other elements of their personal life. Then there's the ultimate human cost of life, of loss of life through suicide. We know that rates of poor mental health and suicide are higher for employees in some industry types and types of work, such as men in construction and women in nursing. The high-level findings of the Thriving at Work report were that while there are more people at work with mental health conditions than ever before, 300,000 people with a long-term mental health problem lose their jobs each year. And that's at a much higher rate than those with physical health conditions. And that's the underlying, well, I suppose the overriding driver of the Mental Health at Work initiative. Around 15% of people at work have symptoms of an existing mental health condition. There's a large annual cost to employers. It's somewhere between 33 billion and 42 billion pound per year, and to the economy as a whole, between 74 billion and 99 billion pounds per year. And the report references a well-established academic evidence base that good work, and you'll hear me talk about good work a lot on this webinar, is good for mental health. So good work is good for mental health. And we'll go on to talk about more about good work in a second. It also considers the findings of the Taylor Review of Modern Working Practices, which was published slightly ahead of the Thriving at Work review. The Mental Health at Work initiative is the result of a collaboration between a range of key organisations, and it's curated by Mind, the mental health charity, with support from the Mental Health at Work Leadership Council that I'm staying on as part of. So that's the background to this. So let's have a look at what we mean when we talk about mental health. Firstly, it's important to understand that when we talk about mental health, we don't mean mental ill health. We mean the mental health we all have, just as we all have physical health. Mental health is about how we think, feel and behave. The World Health Organization defines good mental health as a state of well-being in which every individual realises his or her own potential and can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. 1 in 4 people in the UK will have a mental health problem at some point. There's a full spectrum of mental health conditions, from those that are commonly known, such as anxiety or depression, through to severe mental illnesses. While mental health problems are common, most are mild and tend to be short-term and are normally successfully treated with medication by a GP. Anxiety and depression are the most common, the prevalence appearing to have increased slightly over the last 2 decades, with the biggest rises particularly amongst younger women and older men. They're often a reaction to a difficult life event, such as bereavement, but can also be caused by work-related issues. Health and Safety Executive data shows that the cases of stress, anxiety and depression amounted to 51% of absence from work last year. So mental health conditions now account for more than half of workplace absence. Next, it's important to remember that mental health problems at work may not be caused by work, but they can still be brought to and experienced at work and have a huge impact on an individual and on their colleagues. Work can also aggravate pre-existing conditions, and problems at work can bring on symptoms or make their effects worse. Many individuals don't get diagnosed, and of those who have a diagnosed mental health condition, some choose not to disclose it because of the perceived stigma or fear of potential consequences. I'm sure we'd all agree that employment can have both a positive and a negative impact on an individual's mental health. The Stevenson Farmer Review recognised 3 phases that we all go through at different times at work and which will fluctuate for most of us. We'll recognise them, I think. First, people who are at any point in time thriving. Second, people who are struggling at times. And third, people who are ill and possibly off work. People with poor mental health, including mental health problems and severe mental illness, can be in any of these groups at any point in time. An individual can have a serious mental health problem, but with the right support can still be thriving at work. And I'm sure many of you will have examples of that in your own workplaces. We're all somewhere on the mental health spectrum at any point in time. So this is a business productivity issue, which we as employers have to deal with alongside other health and safety considerations. Creating a positive environment for mental health demonstrably costs less than failing to do so. I made reference earlier to the academic evidence base that good work is good for mental health. Good work consists of autonomy, fair pay, autonomy in your job, fair pay, work-life balance, and opportunities for progression, and a respectful and supportive working environment, i.e. the absence of bullying, harassment and discrimination and so on. So I'll go over that again because this is really important. Good work is good for mental health. Good work consists of autonomy, fair pay, work-life balance, opportunities for progression, a respectful and supportive working environment, i.e. the absence of bullying and harassment and discrimination. I know that's easier to achieve. Some of those are easier to achieve than others, particularly the thing about autonomy at work and work-life balance. It can be hard sometimes to get autonomy in every job role. It can be hard to get work-life balance for everybody all the time. But this is what we're working towards. Good work is good for mental health. So that's what we're working towards for every job role over time. Now, at Roots HR, you'll always hear us talk about what's the legal minimum that you have to do. And we'll always start when we advise you by saying, well, the absolute minimum that you have to do is this. So these are the things that you would be expected to do in law in the name of mental health at work. So the first thing is risk assessments. So whether work is causing a health issue or aggravating it, employers still have a legal responsibility to help their employees. Under the Management of Health and Safety at Work Regs 99, work-related mental health issues must be assessed to measure the levels of risk to staff. Work-related mental health issues must be assessed to measure the level of risk to staff. Where a risk is identified, steps must be taken to remove it or to reduce it as far as reasonably practicable. So stress risk assessments can be done and should be done at the organisational level and at the team level, and then at the individual level where somebody is, where people are particularly impacted by stress. Your free of charge go-to resource advice in respect of this is the Health and Safety Exec website. And there are links to this in my slide number 13 later on. There's an excellent section on mental health conditions, work and the workplace, which references the Stevenson Farmer report I was talking about earlier, and which goes on to set out its management standards for tackling work-related stress. It offers loads of free practical resources, but including, which I particularly like, a tackling work-related stress workbook, a talking toolkit. This is just great to help managers, line managers, to have conversations with staff about work-related stress, and guidance on undertaking a stress risk assessment and examples of 3 different types of stress risk assessment for different types and sizes of SMEs. And then guidance on suicide prevention as well. But there's loads more on there. So that's my first port of call for stress risk assessments, and it's completely free, and there's loads of stuff on there, loads of information on there, more than you'll need if you haven't got stress risk assessments in place already. The second thing that you are expected to do in law is to make reasonable adjustments. So some employees will have a pre-existing physical or mental health condition when they're recruited, or they might develop one. That might be due to factors at work or not at work. Their employers may have further legal requirements to make reasonable adjustments under the Equality Act 2010. So reasonable adjustments are changes an employer makes to remove or reduce a disadvantage related to someone's disability. So changes an employer makes to remove or reduce a disadvantage related to someone's disability. Not all mental health conditions will meet the test of a disability. They will if they are substantial, i.e. they have to be more than trivial, and if they're long term, which is usually taken to be over 12 months. And if because of those things, they have a negative effect on the employee's ability to do normal day-to-day activities, they'll be recognised as a disability in law. It can be hard to get good, clear advice for free on this subject, but the Mental Health at Work website has a toolkit on understanding reasonable adjustments in your workplace, which addresses this topic in depth. More on the Mental Health at Work website from me in a second. While we're on legal requirements, there's also talk of a Mental Health First Aid Act, which gets its second reading in Parliament on the 24th of February. You might have heard about that. It would make it a legal requirement for businesses to offer mental health first aid training. However, there is quite a strong sense that it probably won't come into force anytime soon, not just because of the parliamentary timetable, but because there is resistance to it because of the burden on smaller employers. But we will keep you posted on that. So there's nothing at the moment to say that that's definitely going to be introduced. Talk about the Mental Health at Work website itself. This is the other great free resource I want to share with you today. This is a collection of resources, toolkits, blogs and case studies from the members of the Mental Health at Work Leadership Council and curated by Mind. And again, it's on my link at the end of the slide, at the end of the presentation. On my slides there. There is a lot of material on this website, but it also has a fairly sophisticated built-in search engine. So you can search by topic, by region, by sector, by type of workplace, and even the role of the person who wants the information and the size of the organisation. So they recognise that you know, a line manager might want something different and written differently to an employee. And even there's even materials on there for people that are championing mental health at work in their organisation. So lots of different ways to search for information on there. It's really good for the not-for-profit SME sector because it defines micro organisations as under 10 employees and recognises them differently. So that's great for many of you that will be on here. And it breaks out small employers, medium employers and large employers as well. So it recognises size of organisation in the same way that Roots HR does. It's a lot broader than the HSE website that I was talking about a moment ago, and it covers current topics such as financial well-being and the cost of living crisis, and it gives you materials that you can give to your employees in respect of those areas, or that you can use as the employer. It's got toolkits for things like making workplaces more autism friendly, toolkits for key workers and frontline workers in the health and social care sectors, and it covers topics that are timeless and perpetual in respect to mental health, such as anxiety and depression, but also suicide, both prevention and supporting staff after a suicide. It doesn't have all the answers, but it is good for signposting to more specialised websites too. So, for example, if you go looking for information on specific mental health conditions such as bipolar disorder or antisocial personality disorder, it will signpost you to Mind, where there is more specific information, again for free, on those particular conditions. Much of the material is written for the end user, but there is also guidance on policy and organisational culture and practice, and material aimed at line managers and those supporting line managers. It is quite dynamic, so you will find the odd link that needs updating, as you might expect on something like this. I'd particularly draw your attention to a specific guide for small businesses, not small not-for-profit businesses, just small businesses, but there's, as we all know, a huge amount of overlap in terms of the stuff we have to comply with. And it's created by the Federation for Small Businesses, and it's free on there. And again, I put the link to that on the slides at the end. And there's also a clear, separate, urgent help button. Mental Health at Work doesn't itself offer urgent or emergency help, but if somebody needs urgent help and they're on the website, there's an urgent help button to signpost individuals or people supporting individuals who need immediate help. So they won't get lost on there if they find their way to that website. There is signposting for people in that situation. So looking towards the longer term, the 10-year vision, this is what the Thriving at Work report aims for over a 10-year period for organisations of all types and sizes. And so this is, in my view, what I'd want our organisation and probably, hopefully yours, to be aspiring to have in place in 10 years. Some of this feels like you could have it in place much quicker, perhaps, and some of it might take longer culturally and resource-wise, but it's not, it's all reasonable stuff, I think. So the first thing is good work. That employees in all types of employment will have good work, which we talked about earlier. which contributes positively to their mental health and to our society and to our economy. That's the first thing. The second thing is that every one of us will have the knowledge, tools and confidence to understand and look after our own mental health and the mental health of those around us. The third is that all organisations, whatever their size, will be equipped with the awareness and tools to not only address mental ill health caused or worsened by work, but to prevent it from happening in the first place. And that we'll be equipped to support individuals with a mental health condition to thrive from recruitment and throughout the organisation and throughout their lifetime with the organisation. And that everybody's aware of how to get access to timely help to reduce sickness absence caused by mental ill health. And overall, that we dramatically reduce the proportion of people with a long-term mental health condition who leave employment each year, and that everybody who can benefits from the positive impacts of good work. So those that can be at work are at work and can benefit from the positive impacts of it. So that's the 10-year vision, and it would feel to me to be realistic and achievable, that we can resource ourselves as certainly as individual organisations that are already willing and interested in this and on this call today. But it's the vision of the government really that we achieve that across the economy, across the country in the next 10 years. The Mental Health at Work commitment, the Mental Health at Work Leadership Council has developed this commitment which employers of all sizes can choose to sign up to demonstrate their commitment to supporting people with mental health conditions at work, and which is designed to help you, to enable you to meet the goals of the 10-year vision for your own organisation. Again, I put the link on my slide at the end. Roots HR, of course, has joined up to this, and we'd encourage you to do the same. It's entirely voluntarily. There's no police, nobody policing it to make sure that you do it, but it gives a powerful message out to your team, who will then expect you, I think, reasonably, to work towards achieving or doing the things that are part of the commitment. So the 6 actions required of organisations joining the commitment are, and some of these will need more work than others, depending upon where you're at the moment. The first one is that you demonstrably prioritise mental health in the workplace by developing and delivering a systematic programme of activity. When I read that first time, my heart absolutely sunk for small organisations. I thought, oh gosh, it's so difficult to actually just run the business in the first place without actually having to have systematic programs of activity around people's mental health at work. But actually that doesn't have to be a big plan. It doesn't have to be something that you have to employ somebody to do. Ideas for a systematic program of activity for very small organisations simply include things like having one person who's trained in mental health first aid, keeping that person refresher trained, doing your stress risk assessments and checking them every year, making an action plan that comes out of the risk assessments and following that up, considering whether you can have and afford an employee assistance programme, an EAP for employees. I think we can recommend, I think our preferred supplier, they start from £250 for a year for organisations with 10 employees, I think. Charlotte will be able to provide us more information on that for anybody that wants it. Training on the use of the Mental Health at Work website for line managers. Those are the sorts of things that can form part of a plan that doesn't cost a lot of money or take up a lot of resources or time. So it does mean that you can have a systematic programme of activity even in the smallest type of organisation. The second part of the commitment is about working to ensure that work design and organisational culture drive positive mental health outcomes. This is about good work, isn't it? This is what we were saying earlier on about good work. And so this would be about managers being confident around having check-ins, and actually things like when you're reviewing job descriptions from time to time with people, working towards good work for that particular job role. When you're bringing on board a new job, doing the job description for that, thinking about what's good work, how can we make this best work possible for this particular job role. The third one is about promoting an open culture around mental health. And one of the best ways of doing this around making it okay not to be okay, is to have role models, people in your organisation, leaders who are willing to speak out about their own lived experiences at appropriate times. Obviously, there's better times than others to be doing that. But some of the most successful turning points for organisations in helping it to be okay, not to be okay in your organisation, helping people to speak up, have come from the leaders of those organisations sharing their own lived experience with their workforces in appropriate settings. And again, with that comes, again, line managers getting used to doing check-ins with people and having conversations about mental health with people where it's appropriate to do so. The fourth part of the commitment is about organisational confidence and capability. This is about training for managers, helping, if possible, making sure that managers have got an advice line or a place to go to for their advice in respect of individual employees they're working with, coaching for managers, demonstrations for them of how to use the Mental Health at Work website. The simplest of steps, really. I'd like to see, if possible, managers having training in resilience, in assertiveness and in mindfulness, because I think those three things, if you can find webinar modules or free training, or you can have access to perhaps packages of training that you're using, that you use online, if you can find some resilience training, some assertiveness training, some mindfulness training that your managers can undergo in bite-sized pieces, that can be very powerful indeed for your line managers, even if you can't afford to send them on full-blown management courses, and I'm sure lots of you won't be able to do that. The fifth point is about providing mental health tools and support, and again, that doesn't have to be expensive. We've talked today about two great sources of advice, two sources of ways of advice, which is the Mental Health website and the HSE. But Roots HR also has free tools, and you'll find lots and lots of them online, generally from plenty of other places if you spend some time searching for them. And the final point under the commitment is about increasing transparency and accountability through internal and external reporting. And I'm going to say more about that in a moment, so I won't expand on it now. The link to the Mental Health at Work commitment is on my slide 13, but it's https://www.mentalhealthatwork.org.uk/commitment. So mentalhealthatwork.org.uk/commitment. Moving on to talk about measuring progress. There's no one set way to measure your progress or your results, but I've tried to put together some simple ideas for you. It's a good idea to decide what measures are relevant for your organisation and to adopt those, and then to benchmark them as a starting point to look at your current year's figures, or even last year's figures if you've got that historical information as a baseline. The overriding aim of this Mental Health at Work commitment is a reduction in the number of people who leave employment with a long-term mental health condition. So you could, in theory, adopt that as a measure, but that just might not be relevant for small organisations. You might never have anybody leaving employment for that reason. So improving or getting worse is just not possible to measure. It might be more relevant for larger organisations. But I think everybody could look at their total number of days of absence due to mental health conditions. Most organisations record days of sickness absence and the reason for them. So you could look at your total number of days of absence due to mental health conditions and seek to reduce that year on year over time. And you could also look at the cost of that and seek to reduce that year on year. Those are the most obvious measures, I think. The general thinking being that better work, so good work and a more understanding, supportive environment for mental health conditions mean that just simply mean there's it's a better environment for people to come to work in and less sickness absence relating to it. I understand the equation is not that necessarily always that simple, but that's the general thinking in respect of managing those particular numbers. You could also measure labour turnover or look at labour turnover, because you should find that that reduces and that you manage to retain more staff with mental health conditions. But it might be hard sometimes to tie that in with certainty to it being about your efforts under the banner of mental health at work. You could measure your progress, and you should measure your progress against the mental health work commitment and the plan that you make as part of that commitment, in the same way that you would measure progress against a business plan. We use a red, amber, green method at Roots HR. So, red's not started, amber's in progress, green's completed. But if you do a staff satisfaction type survey from time to time, this is your big win, I think. This is where you can really get some decent understanding of what's going on in your workforce on every level. You could include some questions within that are designed to help you understand how many of your staff view themselves as having a mental health condition, how many of them view themselves as having good work, and you could ask questions around things like autonomy, fair pay, so on and so forth. You could ask whether mental health problems are derived from work and whether they know what support is available to them at work. Also, to understand the areas of your work or your management that are giving rise to problems with mental health at work and stress, and also to understand how well your efforts to manage this are working with staff. And then you could implement you could implement actions as a result of that survey, and then resurvey in 12 months' time or so and ask those questions again. And you'd be looking for improvements and progress in all of those areas. That, I think, is probably your big win for measuring in this area, because you can tie definite things in then, can't you, to what you've been trying to do in the name of mental health at work. Something I was surprised to find out recently is that the government has a voluntary reporting framework for disability, mental health and well-being. And it is entirely voluntary. It's aimed at employers with over 250 employees, but it can be used by smaller organisations too. I popped the link in the last slide, in the slide 13 again. It gives some great suggestions for questions for workplace surveys. So I liked it for that, because it's free for those, and you can adopt those questions for your staff surveys without having to report to the government. But I did think that actually the impact of filling out the report and reporting periodically, the good thing about that actually would probably be that it focuses your mind on doing something, and looking at what you're doing from time to time, looking at what you're achieving from time to time. Now, I know that lots of you on here will come from very small organisations, and if yours is if you're in that bracket and you can only do 3 things, here's what I'd suggest you do. Number 1, undertake your routine stress risk assessments for the organisation as a whole, for any teams or group of roles that are particularly subject to stress more than others. So people that are in client or customer facing roles, complaint handlers, caseworkers, support workers, senior managers who are holding large workloads. I've probably covered everybody in your workforce there, really, haven't I, one way or another? But there will be different stressors for these people, and the HSE website talks really well about factors such as demand and control and so on that make a big difference to different types of role. So do those stress risk assessments. Also do risk assessments for any individuals who are off sick with stress or who are reporting stress to their line managers. First thing I'd always do with somebody who's telling me that work is feeling a bit overwhelming for them, or where I'm seeing signs of work being overwhelming for them, is to sit down with them and do a stress risk assessment with them, because it really helps you and them to find out what's okay and where the stresses are coming from. And if it can't be done with the line manager because that's part of the problem, then help them to identify somebody else who they would feel comfortable having that conversation with. Then make sure that those risk assessments are updated annually or whenever there are changes to the working environment or practices. Second thing, if you only do 3 things, second thing is get comfortable with making reasonable adjustments. Not only are they a legal requirement for people whose mental health conditions would meet the definition of a disability under the Equality Act 2010, but you can use them on a precautionary or goodwill basis, either temporarily or permanently as appropriate, for employees who may have mental health conditions that wouldn't be classed as a disability. So if you want to be, if you want to be seen as a fair and supportive employer, Don't wait till the point that somebody's telling you they think they've got a disability or that you think they've got a disability. A good way to identify the adjustments an employee needs for their situation is to ask for advice on this from a medical professional such as a GP or an occupational health consultant, but simply to sit down and talk to them. The key word is reasonable. The adjustment has to be reasonable for both you and for your organisation and for them. And reasonable adjustments should be offered and agreed by both the employee and the employer, not decided and imposed by just one party. Then finally, if you're only going to do 3 things, the final thing I'd say to do is to train and support your line managers, to get them, to encourage them to get staff talking about mental health, making it okay to be not okay. So training and supporting your line managers in their role in managing the mental health of their team members so they know how to respond. Even the smallest organisations should be able to afford an hour of online training for managers a couple of times a year. Train them to do wellbeing check-ins and on how and when to undertake stress risk assessments. Give a line manager somewhere to go to. Give a line manager somewhere to go to if somebody gives them information that they are concerned about. Make sure the line manager knows how to act on that very quickly indeed. It doesn't have to be someone saying, I feel like I might be going to take my own life. It's nothing as dramatic as that. It can simply be, I'm feeling overwhelmed. I've got too much on. I'm not coping very well at the moment. Whatever those signs might be, if the line manager is not well trained and hasn't had much experience of that, make sure they've got somewhere to make sure they identify that as a concern and that they've got somewhere to take it for support and action alongside them. Train them to resource themselves as well. Signpost them to the relevant information on the HSE and the Mental Health at Work websites and follow up to make sure they found it and that they've acted on it. In particular, if you can, support them to learn how to empathise with their team members and how to anticipate how their actions will impact on them. So, for example, I'm dealing with a case at the moment where a manager has had to give some bad news to some members of the staff, and the way that it broke that bad news, you could anticipate, and it would not take much to anticipate they were going to find this difficult news to hear. But the way that the communication was done to the individuals has had significant mental health impacts for those people. And so coaching and supporting managers to recognise when news is going to be difficult for people to hear, and then to still give that news in a supportive way and to keep people supported through what follows afterwards is an important skill for line managers to develop. Use lived experience, use common sense, and if you are a more established, larger organisation, or if you're simply minded to make a lasting commitment to the mental health at work commitment, then I'd suggest you sign up to the commitment scheme, make a 1-year plan and a longer action plan to achieve the 6 points within it over whatever period of time it's going to take you in your organisation. So here's this long-awaited links slide. For everybody saying in the chat, please can you send me the links for this, that and the other. They're all set out here for you, and they're slide 13 on the PowerPoint that we're going to send out to you later on today. The ones, for those of you that want the ones related to the stress risk assessments, the HSE Tackling Work-Related Stress Workbook is the one that will take you through to, you don't have to do the workbook, there are links in it to the stress risk assessments. But the HSE stuff, well, all of it actually, all these resources are just really great to have for free. So some free resources from Roots HR. That's it for the content on this session. I'm going to deal with your questions in the chat room in a second. If you have questions that are specific or unique to individual cases, in which case you may not want to raise them here, and I may not be able to deal with them properly here, then here's some of what we can offer you for free. So we offer a free hour of consultancy time by phone or email to every social sector organisation. To use that hour, there's very light touch. Just get in touch with us on 01562 840060 or info@rootshr.org.uk. And the number and the email are personed, Monday to Friday, 8:30 to 5, excluding bank holidays. So you'll get a very quick response in each case there. We can also offer a range of paid for consultancy services related to the webinar. So things like advice in respect of specific cases. We know that mental health raises quite a lot of individual unique cases. So advice in respect of those specific cases can be obtained from us. Support to develop and implement your stress risk assessments, and training for managers. We can help with all of that on a paid for basis. We also offer a range of straightforward HR toolkits free of charge for employers in our sector. These can be your starting point for getting your HR right in your organisation, and each one's got an introduction, guidance notes, template letters and other documents which you can tailor to your organisation, and a training presentation to explain how to implement those toolkits in your organisation. They are excellent, but I would say that because I wrote every single one of them. The current titles are recruitment, selection, pre-employment checking, induction, probation, agile appraisal, pay and benefits, managing well-being, personnel files, managing leavers, managing sickness absence, and managing underperformance. To get hold of those toolkits, you can have as many of them as you like. Just get in touch with us again on the 01562 840060 number or info@rootshr.org.uk. And we have a number of further free webinars coming up, and you can see these by signing up for our mailing list via the link on the bottom of this screen here, or keeping an eye on our website or our social media. So I'm going to have a go at answering some of your questions that you've put up today on the chat. I'm going to ask Charlotte to read those questions out to me. Obviously, Charlotte, I think some of them may have been dealt with through simply me saying where the links are, so let's not spend time on those. But if there's other questions, I'll be happy to have a look at them.
Okay, so we've just got one here. So do you classify mental health separately to work-related stress?
No, not at all. I would see work-related stress as being one of the types of issue, problem, condition that you're dealing with when you're thinking about mental health at work.
Thank you, Jan. And I think we've covered this one with the where to find the tools, but there's a kind of a question within it. So can you signpost me to reasonable adjustment templates toolkits, as it's sometimes difficult to know how to record this consistently across the service rather than just as a staff contact?
Yeah, I know. I really, actually, that's a very, very, very good good question. One of I would go to, let me just go back to the link slide and see if it's got it on there. No, what I'll do is I'll add on the link to the toolkit that the Mental Health at Work website does for understanding reasonable adjustments. They've got a workbook on that, and I'll put that on my slide 13, so it'll be there when you get it. But one of the things that Roots HR has got that I would suggest you might want to drop a line to us this afternoon if you want it, info@rootshr.org.uk. What we've got as a template that I've not seen, I think it's quite unique to us, is an A4 sheet that helps you to consider the reasonableness of the adjustment for your organisation. You'll appreciate, everybody, that some organisations, what would be reasonable in one large organisation will not be reasonable for a small organisation in a different sector. You'll appreciate that, won't you? So what this template does is it provides like a flowchart format, really, for you to work through in terms of what's actually reasonable for your organisation and the impact that adjustment is actually likely to make for the individual. Because, you know, if it's going to cost £5,000 and the actual impact is likely to only alleviate the problem by 5 or 10%, then maybe it's just not worth it. Whereas if it's going to cost £500 and it's going to completely solve the problem. It's very different, isn't it? So that's the sort of thing that this template can do for you. So if you want that template, just drop Charlotte a line, and one of our admin team will send it out to you this afternoon. That's a template on assessing the I suppose assessing the effectiveness of a particular reasonable adjustment that's being requested.
Thank you, Jan. We've got a few more. So how do you support staff members who may be experiencing stress and anxiety which is not work related?
Stress and anxiety which is not work related. I think it's probably going to be having an impact on work. So it might not be generated by work in the first place, but it becomes work related if it's having an impact on their attendance at work or their concentration at work or so on and so forth. I appreciate that the amount of time that you want to put into that might vary from one organisation to another, depending on how big or small your organisation is. But my starting point would be to well, if they will have a dialogue with their line manager, I'd be trying to get the line manager to check that they've got support. What support have they got? Where are they getting support from? And then to just find other places to signpost them to, but particularly to have a look at the Mental Health at Work website. I'd be wanting to make sure as well that they're engaged with the medical services. I suppose I should say that as a starting point, if that's appropriate to the level of condition they're experiencing. But the Mental Health at Work website has got loads and loads of reading for employees on this particular subject. So your line managers can either signpost them there or can actually send them links to relevant articles if they're minded to actually to do that. I suppose the other thing that I would also be thinking about is, have I got an EAP, an employee assistance programme? Because if I have, then people can access an EAP 24/7 for any particular problem. It doesn't have to be work related. So that would be a great way to say to those individuals, look, recognise it's not work related, but go and have a chat to, because they can probably get some counselling through the EAP as well. And that can often help. People. Talking therapy generally is recognised as being one of the best things, particularly for the hopefully shorter term, less serious mental health conditions. I hope that helps a bit.
Thank you, Jan. And then we've got a couple more. So what are the next steps if you have provided support and reasonable adjustments over an extended period, but the staff member's mental health means they cannot perform their role? How would you manage a capability process like this?
Yeah. I mean, it's really difficult, isn't it? Really, really difficult. This is probably one of the hardest things that I think anybody in the HR profession comes up against. You'll probably all know that capability, those of you in HR on this call will certainly know that capability is a lawful reason for dismissal. So if somebody isn't capable of doing their job, you can follow a fair process to dismiss them. And occasionally, sometimes that has to happen. But part of that fair process would be, first of all, well, two key things. First of all, getting some medical advice, definitely before you take any decisions whatsoever, always get an occupational health report or some medical advice in a situation where you feel like you've come to the end of the informal options. And the second thing that I would say is then try very hard to find them alternative work in your organisation. If you possibly can. I appreciate some of you are from very small organisations, and that might be very difficult indeed, nigh on impossible. But depending upon the nature of the condition and the support the individual needs, I might also, if I really feel there is nothing for us left in our organisation, and that the formal process I'm going to go down is probably going to take me to a place where there is no alternative but dismissal. If that's my thinking, I might start as a diligent employer talking to some external agencies that might be able to help the individual and provide a bit of a softer landing if dismissal is where I have to get to. Obviously, I know we're trying to avoid it, but I also know that lots of you are from very small organisations and it might sometimes be unavoidable. So in those situations, I'd be thinking about things like, could I offer some outplacement support as part of a leaving package? Could I put them into contact with some other organisations that might be able to help them to find work in the future, such as I think it's called Access to Work, which is the organisation that helps people to helps organisations and employees to stay in work longer. I hope that helps a little bit, and I hope it's frank and it's the reality of the situation. It's not the answer I'd really like to give, but hopefully it helps you to deal with the reality of the thing. If you want to talk more about an individual case, please do come through to Roots HR and we can talk about it individually to you.
Thank you, Jan. And just one final one. Can you just repeat the potential SME external contact that they could sign up to for potential affordable support?
SME. Oh, I'm a bit lost here. I'm not quite sure what this is being referred to, but I think this might be I was referring to a workbook, a toolkit on the Mental Health at Work website, which is provided by the Federation of Small Businesses. So in my links slide, there it is. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth one down. Mental health for small workplaces. That's the that's the toolkit that I was talking about, which is written by the Federation for Small Businesses. I hope that's oh, if you had to outsource for a person to work with us. I don't quite understand that question. I don't think we've talked about that today. Sorry if I'm not understanding that properly. Are there any more questions, Charlotte?
No, I think we've come to the end of the questions now, but if there are any further questions, please do email us and we can get back to you.
Dawn, the lady that was asking that particular question, just if you want to email into info@rootshr.org.uk, I'll respond to that this afternoon for you, so you've got an individual answer from me, because I don't quite understand what the question's about. Okay. Good. All right. Well, look, it's been lovely to have you all on here today. I had my Comply slide flashed up earlier. Comply is Roots HR's market-leading people management service, which helps micro and small and medium social sector organisations to comply with employment law and to manage day-to-day HR queries, issues and cases arising. You can access this via an annual subscription, which gives you unlimited access to our advice line, a range of documentation, access to discounts, regular HR updates via blogs, newsletters and webinars. And the prices start from £153 plus VAT per month. So great value for those of you that may not at the moment have a subscription service for your line managers to use. Alternatively, you can buy that via our as required service, where you buy a number of hours and just use them on an as required basis. So that hourly rate is £95 plus VAT per hour with a minimum purchase of 4 hours. I think in particular, this is the sort of go-to place, really, we think, for paid for advice for your line managers. And finally, there's all of our contacts and how to get in touch with us on social media. info@rootshr.org.uk will find your way to Charlotte and Leanne, our admin team. You've got the Roots HR website there and our links on LinkedIn, Facebook and Twitter. Some of you, the names some of you that I've seen coming up today are really old friends. I've seen people from organisations that have been with Roots HR right from the start, and some of you have been with us much more recently. Thank you all very much for joining me. It's been great talking to you. I wish you every success with implementing everything that you might want to put in place from this webinar. Thank you very much indeed, and have a good afternoon, everybody. Bye for now.